Okay.
All right.
Okay, we're good. We're good. We're here.
Yeah. So how did it go without me? Did everything fall apart? I listened to some of it. I didn't. To be honest, I didn't make it through both podcasts.
No, it's okay. Wow. No. No, it's fine. Yeah, no, it was good. I mean, it's good to have you back, of course. But yeah, it was nice to read that with Brother X. I do think we hit on some very interesting points, especially with respect to like patent laws and how definitions of patents basically could be at the root of a lot of our issues in the pharmaceutical industry. It's like maybe those laws need to be rethought. People don't really address it from that perspective very often. And the Richard Posner article we did that. So yeah, no, it was cool. But yeah, it's good to have you back.
Nice.
So you were in the Netherlands. No,
that's right.
We can't say though. Yeah. Okay.
We can't say.
Did you go to Belgium? I couldn't remember if you're going to Belgium.
No, I didn't go to Belgium. I went to Holland and then and then the Czech Republic.
Okay. Well, that's cool. How was it?
It was great. I mean, I always like Amsterdam. It's great. And then Prague is just so cheap. It's crazy. Do you remember that silly movie from like 2005 or something called Euro Trip?
Vaguely sounds familiar.
It was just a dumb comedy. But there's a funny scene where they run out of money and they wind up in Slovakia in Eastern Europe.
Oh, yeah.
And they think that they're done for because they have like $4 left. But it turns out that they can like stay at the Ritz and get room service and everything with $4 there. And basically it was kind of felt like that. Like I felt rich.
Huh. That's
everything is like a third the cost in Czech Republic.
Huh. That's very interesting. Was there any like I don't know, like are people feeling the war there?
Yeah, I mean there's Ukrainian flags everywhere.
Yeah. Okay.
Just the whole city is filled with Ukrainian flags.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
and then in the Netherlands also, I was told that there's no social acceptability for anything critical of Ukraine. Like it's just not okay to not be fully supportive.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because they feel apparently like next thing that's going to happen is Russia's going to march into Europe and just take over everything. Because none of these countries have armies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, that's opening a whole can.
Yeah.
But that's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Yeah. I guess I did ask if they're feeling the war. So
I don't know if they're feeling it. They're worried.
Yeah, they're worried. Yeah. I guess that's kind of what I was getting at, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but cool. Nice.
But yeah, it's very cheap.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, well, while you were traversing through those places, I was watching Napoleon, the movie. I saw it while you were gone. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, should we? But yeah, I mean, it was good though. I mean, that's cool though. Sounds like it was fun.
There was one comment or there was one point that you and Brother X were making and agreeing with each other, and I was like tearing my hair out.
Ha 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 ha. Which part? Do you remember?
You're talking about labor being social.
Ha 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 ha. Yeah, you posted that.
I posted, a little bit of it.
Yeah,
but it was driving me crazy.
Well, I wasn't saying I completely agree with it, but I see the perspective. I see how Marx could make that perspective. Yeah. And it was
anyway,
but it's true.
We don't have to talk about it for that.
It's true. Ha 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 ha. No, it's funny. Yeah. So back to Foucault.
Yes.
Ha 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 ha.
I didn't really. I tried to get it, and I feel like I didn't have enough focus. The problem is, I feel like I needed to set aside like 3 evenings.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a dense one, but I do think actually it can be summarized sort of simply in that the Greeks, it's basically examining the sexuality of the Greeks, or rather the lack thereof.
Right.
And that's really the point, is that the Greeks didn't look at sexuality from the perspective, they didn't have a thing called sexuality. Instead, they looked at it from the perspective of pleasure, or as they call it, Aphrodesia.
Right.
Yeah. And it was more about moderation of pleasure for the purpose of maintaining self-control, because self-control leads to a virtuous life. And they also just thought that virtue was something that you should practice. So we're constantly practicing moderation. And so the acts of Aphrodesia, which constitute all the types, right? Hetero, homo, etc. It's all sort of very specific to the subject.
Sure.
To their things like their status in society, like how much money they have. People with more money can get away with more things. But actually also there's a point made that, however, if you're in the public eye, you should have a more chaste life.
Right.
And because it's about setting an example of virtue.
Right.
And then, he really looks at basically how sexuality was problematized gradually, though. It began to become problematized by people like doctors and whatnot.
Right.
And, of course, it became even more problematized in our society. But it also is talking about how it was fed into the structure of society through sort of various ways, like economics and talking about cost-benefit analysis to your actions of sexual natures. And then things like dietetics, kind of thinking about your sex with relation to your health. And so, the Greeks, like Hippocrates would talk about sexual things while also talking about other things like the seasons and wet and dry. And like if you're in a wet climate, maybe you shouldn't do. I didn't, really grasp all that.
Well, there was the whole the time of day and like picking the proper timing.
Exactly. So anyway,
and the reason that incest is bad is because of improper timing. Right.
Exactly. Yes. And so that's kind of an interesting thing is that, I just want to see. So it was, so he discusses the problematization and structuralization of sexuality with respect to dietetics, economics, erotics, and then he finishes with true love. And more specifically, he talks about three motifs in the problematization of sexual activities: the relation to the body and to the health, the relation to wives and the institution of marriage, and then the relation to boys, their freedom and their virility. And so it's, ends by talking about like how the reason that you shouldn't basically, like you were talking about incest, you shouldn't do devious things with children is because of their purity and and whatnot, and it's all about maintaining that, and then of course that switches to a different perspective in modern day. But this is, I think, the interesting point, though, is that a lot of their practices actually are similar to how I think we view it today, because while it's not exact, it's like a lot of the norms and stuff were still felt. It was like, it's true. I think we all have this feeling of like, you shouldn't be overly sexual in your appetites, and moderation's always good and stuff like that. And in fact, an ascetic life in some ways is the most sort of virtuous, I think, and which is why it's like we hold up the priests who are chaste and stuff like that. So anyway, very not brief summary, but that was a summary.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think where I was struggling is I started reading the introduction, which is very confusing.
You think so? Because I actually didn't think. I thought it laid it out pretty well.
Maybe I was reading it too fast or something. Okay. It was just...
maybe it's a bad translation, too. I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible.
I mean, yeah. I don't know what edition you're using. I'm using the Penguin Classics, I think.
Let's see.
I mean, it doesn't really matter.
I'm using Vintage Books, a division of Random House.
Oh, yeah, that's the one I have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
Translated from the French by Robert Hurley.
Rob.
Yeah.
Yep, we're reading the same one.
Nice. Well, I don't know. I think it's really that I didn't give it enough time.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay.
I was trying to like speed read it, and I think it's not really speed readable for me.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a tough one, and yeah, I mean, but I do think I have like outlined on page 5 his goal. So rather to analyze, so this does not mean that I propose to write a history of the successive conceptions of desire, of concupiscence, or of libido, but rather to analyze the practices by which individuals were led to focus their attention on themselves, to decipher, recognize, and acknowledge themselves as subjects of desire, bringing into play between themselves and themselves a certain relationship that allows them to discover in desire the truth of their being, be it natural or fallen.
I highlighted that exact same
Oh, really?
thing.
That's funny. Yeah,
like,
okay. So
from where you started and where you ended, that's what I highlighted.
That's hilarious. So that's good. Critical reading.
Critical reading. Yeah, what does he mean by that again? What this critical thing?
I think you're right. I think it was from what was the Austrian school?
No, the Frankfurt school.
What's the difference? Just kidding.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The Austrian school likes strudel more.
Yeah, that's I know. I'm getting all of it. Dude, I do that so much. It's a bad thing.
I guess it makes sense. Austria, Frankfurt's nearby.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just remembered they were German and
right.
Of German origin. Obviously, Austria is not Germany.
Right.
But they were all the Habsburgs at one point, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Maybe
kind of. It was crazy. Actually, we went to a castle outside of Prague.
Oh, yeah?
That was an old Habsburg castle. And I was reading about it. And just like the amount that they got into political leadership all over the world was crazy. Like the Emperor of Mexico was a Habsburg.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you can probably trace their descendants into, many. But I'm trying to think, Frankfurt might have been, because like the Habsburgs basically became the Holy Roman Empire, right? Or I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, we're getting into stuff I feel like I should know more about.
And the Austro-Hungarian Empire and all that.
Yeah. Fiefdoms.
Yeah, there was a portrait of Marie Antoinette in the castle.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Was she related?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Marie Antoinette was Austrian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But there's this whole goofy thing about how they'd get somebody in the Habsburg married into the royalty in Spain, and then
Well, because that's how you ensure that you don't go to war. I mean, Napoleon was trying to do that.
Right. That's what's interesting about it is it's kind of like a non-war way of getting a lot of political power.
Right. It's interesting though because this is a bit of a jump and we're getting way off from Foucault, but that's okay. We need to give the listeners a break from Foucault. What am I talking about? Oh, So I watched, like I said, Napoleon, and to be fair, I listened to a Napoleon autobiography back in the summer. So, I did a little bit more work. So it was reminding me a lot of things, but like Joseph, because this wasn't really in the movie, but Josephine kind of, in some ways, if you want to call it one out, the best out of the Napoleon sort of experience, because her progeny, I think, became the kings and queens of like a bunch of different places in Europe. Like I think there's still like related to like the king of Somebody somewhere in Scandinavia. I don't remember where.
Nice.
But anyway, it doesn't really matter. Who cares? This is much less interesting than I thought it would be.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what to pull out that's interesting, because I feel like you summarized it pretty well. But,
thank you. Well, there's tons of... I mean, so one of the things... So I propose after this we go to the volume 3, because, like, you know, there's a lot of just... He goes into details about just things that, you know, it's probably we don't want to. But, yeah, I mean, there's... In my estimation, there's tons of interesting things. One thing is just... how I always do, but I believe this can really be framed more directly when you talk about it with respect to consciousness. Yes. Yeah. Let's everybody take a drink.
Yeah, all right.
Because it's the thing, though, is, you know, you're talking about being ruled by the passions. Oh, that's really it, though, is the Greeks, their fundamental philosophy, as was described by Foucault at least, and this is generalizing, but it was a philosophy of freedom, and it was the idea that the passions, anybody that's ruled by the passions isn't actually free. You're a slave. And so that's why living a moderate life and using logos or reason and logic to control the animal passions. So this is where I'm looking at it from the perspective of consciousness, because it's like civilization seems to be about propagating consciousness and maybe a weird manifestation of consciousness, as is some religion, right, as we discussed.
Sure.
So you're leaning into the idea of control and using reason, which is consciousness like tool, and you're leaning away from the animal instincts, which are the passions, you know, those desires that are, yeah. So that's where I think it could be framed, Antushka.
Consciousness. Sure, sure.
Anyway.
What do you think of his use of the Greek terms? Because I feel like that's part of what makes it hard to read. Not that it makes it bad, but I feel like he's getting at nuanced meanings that I think I need to read it 2 or 3 times to really sort of absorb.
Sure.
So like the word Aphrodesia, when he gives a kind of succinct definition of it, he said, the Aphrodesia are the acts, gestures, and contacts that produce a certain form of pleasure. Acts, gestures, and contacts that produce pleasure.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes it an interesting subtlety, is it isn't the pleasure itself, and it isn't the drive or anything like it's not a sex drive, it's not lust, it isn't the feeling of sex, it is, I guess, the acts that produce pleasure or something.
Yes.
It's like it's a very specific thing.
Well, actually, I would disagree. I don't know, because in some ways I feel like he's using the Greek word because it's also kind of more general than maybe when we think.
Yeah, maybe more encompassing.
Yeah. I don't know. But that's specific in a sense.
Well, I just mean that, using a word that we don't have one word for, or something like that.
Yeah, no, because, I mean, he also talks about, and I always forget how to say it, but, so enkrateia, which is basically, I summarize it to mean essentially self-discipline or self-mastery.
Right.
And this is what you're supposed to use to achieve sophrosyne, which is moderation.
Right. But then there was that whole, I'm looking for it now since you brought that up. Then
the opposite of enkrateia is akrasia, and the opposite of sophrosyne or scene is achalasia.
Yes.
Remember that. Remember. This is very important.
So I think I found it. So the virtue of sophrosyne is described rather as a very general state that ensures that one will do what is fitting as regards to both gods and men. That is, one will not only moderate, but righteous, and one will not only be moderate, I don't know, but righteous and just and courageous as well. Mm-hmm. In contrast, enkrateia, how are you saying it?
Enkrateia, I don't know.
Sure. Is characterized more by an active form of self-mastery. I feel like this is where I'm interested in these words. What?
You were talking about sophrosyne before, right? Because sophrosyne is, I think, it's the moderation. It's sophrosyne.
I'm just reading it.
It was a state that could be approached through enkrateia.
Yeah, so that's what he says later. So it kind of confuses me.
No, he says that a few times, though. I feel pretty confident that that's what... Can you...
I'm not paraphrasing him at all. I'm literally reading his words here.
No, but... Well, read the words again.
All right, the virtue of sophrosyne is described rather as a very general state that ensures that one will do what is fitting as regards to both gods and men. That is, one will be not only moderate, but righteous and just and courageous as well.
Right.
In contrast, enkrateia is characterized more by an active form of self-mastery, which enables one to resist or struggle and to achieve domination in the area of desires and pleasures.
Yeah, I see why the confusion is, because it says in contrast. But I take that
I think
more
that he's saying that, I think it's in contrast in meaning, not that these ideas, not that one doesn't lead to the other.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Anyway, but what is interesting to me, so this enkrateia, all these words, I feel like the Greek words he's using are active words. They're...
Well, I would say enkrateia is an active word.
And so is...
sophrosyne?
No. Whoa.
Aphrodesia.
Aphrodesia. Aphrodite. Yeah, that one. Because it's the acts that create... Right.
Yeah. But this is my point, is sophrosyne's more of a state.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's... I mean, yeah.
Right. No, but sophrosyne's not the chapter. The chapter is enkrateia. I'm saying that it's interesting that he's picking these words...
Sure.
To build the Greek philosophy on action rather than states of thought or logical structures or anything like that.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Doesn't land with you.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't find it that interesting for some reason. Sorry. Why do you find it interesting? Maybe I'm just being stupid.
It's kind of it's just a dynamic system versus a static system. Mm-hmm. So that he's building a dynamic system to work within, rather than saying... To me, the idea of sort of goodness and sin as sort of, like if there's a Venn diagram or something like that, you have bubbles of things that are good and bubbles of things that are bad.
For the audience,
what?
Antushka's holding his hands in an orb-like state.
Yeah. So there's bubbles of things that are good and bubbles of things that are bad. And instead, he's setting up a series of actions.
Yeah.
And that the action is how you experience the world or how you develop the philosophy. It's around the action. It's not around a state.
Right. Yeah, no, I guess I see what you're getting at. That it seems to me what you're saying is that you would assume you'd build something off of a static. You'd start with the static and then move to action.
Right, that the action is downstream. So the action is what you do in relation to the philosophy, whereas he's saying the philosophy is the action. He's not saying that. I feel like that's the system he's building.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we can move on.
No, sorry. I think you're right, though, that the use of the Greek words is, it makes sense why he's doing it. It does make it harder to read because it's hard to keep all of his definitions sort of straight, and the vastness of the range of the definitions. Because it's like you said, it's like enkrateia is like the act, and what it's like three things, right? But I guess my hesitation because I feel like there might be actually a static state that precedes the act of enkrateia, which is, I guess maybe logos, or it's it would be maybe the desire of freedom. Basically what I'm saying is just because he started here doesn't mean it's actually the beginning. There could be something that leads to enkrateia.
But I feel like he's laying out pillars or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I also think it's interesting to use the word logos. Why do we do that?
Because I think Socrates did.
No, but there's probably some nuance to that word versus logic. Logos and logic don't feel like true synonyms to me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so I don't know if logic is like the English version of logos too. You know what I mean?
I
don't know. Yeah. We're getting into very esoteric stuff here, though.
Well, this whole thing feels kind of esoteric to me.
Yeah, well, so the interesting thing, though, is first off, this I guess more the first volume, but, I was just reading about the impact of Foucault a little bit and was reminded that, like, what was her name? I should find her name.
Judith Butler?
Judith Butler was very influenced by...
Gender performativity.
And the Gender Problem, I think, her book.
Yeah.
I think it was building off of a lot of ideas that Foucault put in here that showed... Because essentially what it makes you realize is that, the Greeks didn't perceive sexuality at all, right? It was something that became defined as in, the 18th century onward. And as Foucault lays out in the first volume, it was defined for power reasons. It's often associated with things in society that are exerting power on the individual, whether it's the medical or the jurists, the jurists, the laws. And yeah, so it's building off of, before this book, his crime and like discipline. He had like a discipline book. Right. And also it's building off of all of his books, The Birth of the Clinic and everything, because it brings up these good points about how we, in a lot of ways, we have created these things to have the individuals define themselves by it and thus sort of constantly judge themselves within that framework of like, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I whatever? And it makes you wonder about the limitations of that and also the benefits of that. And when you compare it to the Greeks too, where it wasn't thought of in those terms, it was thought of more in the terms of, we already said, framed for moderation of pleasures and balance of, basically, you're balancing pleasure with honor and virtue. And, because it was understood that everybody has sexual desires. This is a thing about being an animal. But we're also these interesting animals that can reflect on our desire, and also these interesting animals that have an ability of auto things, right? Which not every animal has the ability to do. So that opens up all these other avenues of self-control and stuff. So, it makes sense to me, though, that this is so influential. But that's kind of why I wanted to read it, because it's like where, he lays out a lot of interesting points in this. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, so you're familiar with Judith Butler then?
Yeah, I read her in grad school. It's pretty wild what she says.
What does she say?
So she takes the narrative thing pretty far, so that both gender and sex are narratives. And like the penis is a construction. It's a narrative construction. There is no such thing as a penis or a male or a female. These are things we perform and things we imagine. But these are not, there's no like essential substrate of anything like that. Gender and sex are performed narratives. It's sort of the beginning of there is no such thing, like the modern gender studies and stuff, it all builds off that.
I wonder
the sense that like what we think is a penis or what we think is a vagina is just a story we're telling ourselves.
What is the basis in all this then? Is it like the subject is the basis and society is the thing that's always acting on it? Like is there what would the natural human look like, I wonder, in their perspective? I'm not saying you would know this, it's just making me think about that.
They might not even say there is such a thing as a natural human.
Right.
It's that thing because actually at its root, even death is a narrative.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I guess my question would be, how certain are you in your understanding of this?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain I read it.
Yeah. It just sounds wild.
Like you don't believe that anybody believes that?
It just sounds wild. I don't know what to make with that.
It is wild, but I remember having conversations in grad school with other people that are like, yeah, I believe that.
I guess I just don't know what it means. Maybe that's what I'm getting at. Like, what does it mean that death is a narrative? What do you do with that?
I don't know. What it mean? I think the purpose is unraveling sort of the basic structures of society. Because at its root,
But that's kind of what
Butler
I mean.
Especially it's revolutionary.
But that's why I'm asking, because it's when you ask these questions, it makes me think that you're trying to unravel it to make some other different kind of thing, right? And I guess I just assumed that maybe they wanted to make whatever the natural thing was. But I agree with this idea that there is no natural human divorced from society, at least now. And that was the point about labor being social, by the way. That's the fundamental point that lies beneath that statement, is that we are, without our ability to control it, acted on by society and formed based off of the society that we grow up in. But there are some universal truths regardless of society. And I guess it's like, if you want to call death, whatever you want to call it, and whatever story you want to build around it, the act of being dead still occurs, right?
Right.
So that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about, like, there must be some basis underneath this that they're getting at. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Maybe there is no basis.
Yes, right. That's very interesting. And that makes sense, too, because, when you think about Hegel, who talks about, dialectic, that's basically makes sense that you'd have the rational sort of standpoint that there kind of is a basis, and then you'd have the other standpoint where there is no basis.
Right.
And why I say rational, I mean the rational thought, like the positivist.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I don't know if the audience knows or if they're listening anymore, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, I'm talking about, honestly, like the sort of thought that led up to Nazi Germany, if that's any...
Right, like the hyper-rational.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Rationality gone bad.
Yeah. I think it all can go bad. I don't agree with Judith Butler. I think that there is... that the idea that there is no essence and there is no bottom layer is a potent idea.
Yeah.
I don't agree that death doesn't exist, and I don't agree that sex and gender aren't real. I think that it is an important narrative to grapple with in the face of hyper-rationality. And it's kind of like what we've talked about before with the turtles all the way down thing. I think that turtles all the way down, as silly as it is a beautiful idea. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, it seems like there is some strange truth to that in the universe, because you keep finding smaller and smaller things. And you never get to the bottom. You find atoms, and those atoms are made of pieces, and you can keep going smaller and smaller. And it seems like you could just sort of go forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, the interesting thing is, our progression technologically has sort of interestingly scaled proportionally with our resolution that we probe the universe at. It's like the more technologically advanced we get, the greater we can probe.
Right.
Both macroscopically and microscopically.
Right.
So I guess all I'm saying is that it's like we are benefiting from this. Or it might be, I don't know if it's, what's feeding what, but the fact that we have all this technological innovation, I think is on whole a good thing, which is where I always try to square when I think about all these philosophies that try to tear down the present society.
Right.
It's like you have to square it with all the positives of the present society too. The overall better health that people have, though there's a lot of issues that I have with the obviously current medical establishment and past medical establishments. But yes, anyway, yeah. But I agree. The idea that there's no ground is a potent philosophy and a good counterbalance to the hyper-rational ones.
And I think we can even see it in rational spaces. You can see it in math. There's no smallest number.
Well, yeah, math is continuous, but the practical math is discrete.
Of course. Yeah. Of course. Like, we can't sit around, like, existing in the world of quarks and stuff.
Or, it's just...
It doesn't make any sense, even.
That's actually a really good analogy, though, to what we're saying. What? I think the mathematical analogy that you have discrete and continuous math. It's like you have to sort of deal with both. But, when it comes down to a lot of the sort of practical engineering questions, you're going to be in the discrete space. Though obviously you have, continuous aspects that are pondered within them to push the field forward, blah, blah, blah. Right. God. Who knows?
Yeah. But I think what you just said was good, and it has very little to do with sexuality.
Yeah, no, but it does and it doesn't, because we got on this saying and began to get on this by talking about the impact of Foucault, and I think this is one of the impacts that Foucault had. Again, he was in a lineage of other people, but he was very much an institutional shatterer.
Yes.
That not a ton of people have read him directly, but the people that read him directly then went on and had a lot of influence.
Yeah.
And because he writes compellingly. Even though he's confusing. It's like he brings up a lot of interesting points. And this is actually something that Chomsky said in an interview. Somebody asked him, like, what's your perspective of Foucault? Because he debated him. He was like... He basically said, like, he thinks that he reminded people, essentially, this is my paraphrasing, of important facts that, like, a lot of people had forgotten about. Because, I don't know. I take that with a grain of salt. Maybe that's just, I just interpreted that's what he's saying because I got that from him. But anyway, that's what I look at with this. It's just, it reminds you, like, oh, wow, the Greeks had this completely different perspective. They weren't thinking in terms of these groups. And they were still thinking in terms of groups, just different types of groups, right? Yeah.
But that's very much my kind of thing. It's like what we talked about how there hasn't always been an income tax, and reminding people of that.
Right.
And it's a much shorter time scale, but it's that sort of thing. Right. Just because something is one way doesn't mean it has always been that way.
Yes. Yeah, and it's always just, what are your goals, I suppose? What are your goals?
Yeah, what are Foucault's goals?
It's a good question. I wonder that, because he was... This was his last book. These were his last books. This series was his last. And he died of AIDS in 1984. Right. So it's very interesting. I don't know. I just wonder. I wonder what he was thinking and what his goal was. I mean, his goal was, as he says, looking at a lot of it, was the problematization of sexuality. Because I think that's another fundamental point he makes is the Greeks didn't. They began problematizing it from the perspective of like doctors and stuff like that. But on the whole, it was still like we all have urges for things, and again, it's about moderation and chastity in some avenues. And so maybe this is where I quarrel a little bit, because I'm like, isn't that basically still saying that it's a problem? You know?
Right. Yeah.
But anyway.
I mean, the romanticization of the pre-19th century world.
Right.
So one thing I kind of struggle with is getting a handle on what he means by sexuality.
Oh, it's just, well, I think like heterosexuality, homosexuality. I think more
like
maybe
orientation?
Orientations, pederasty, all of that stuff. I think, yes. You know, basically all the definitions that cropped up in the 19th and 20th century. I mean, we see that even more now. It's only expanding more, and that's sort of one of the things a lot of people point out about.
Right.
Has become kind of a motif for the left, right? Is that you have all these other definitions of sexuality. The LBTGQ, it keeps getting longer.
Right. So you're saying that he means orientation. So this is like the history of sexual orientation.
I think so. Yes. It's the history of how it started to be framed that way.
I see.
Because the Greeks didn't frame it from that perspective.
Right.
You weren't like... And so this was another thing, is like, there's also the... You know, he talks about and again, Foucault was a gay man. He was talking, and so I think he also, you're looking at it from the perspective of a man who was gay in the 40s and 50s and 60s, right? Where again, the system was in its hyper rational mania. They were chemically castrating homosexuals during this time in the U.S. in the 1950s, and. In some cases, lobotomizing. I mean, I've read case studies of like people taking out portions of the brain to deal with certain sexual proclivities. And so he was responding to that. But yeah, sorry, I got on a whole tangent though.
No, I mean, what you're saying makes sense. I'm also just kind of like trying to scan to see if because I didn't get a great definition. He says it a lot, and then he says things like sexuality refers to people becoming the subject of asexuality or something like that.
But that's exactly it, I think. Yeah, that's what we're saying, I think.
But that's like a circular, like that's the word within its own definition.
But it's the examination. Becoming a subject is the examination of oneself. And the examination is leading to all these definitions. It's like, oh, I have this desire, so I'm this thing. And that's why it was hand in hand with doctors really were at the forefront of doing this, and the psychoanalysts. You become the subject. So that's it. It's it is self-referencing, but they're also, I mean, this is actually a point he makes, is there's two aspects to it. There's the outside people judging the person,
right?
But there's also the person judging themselves based off of these norms that were constructed in society.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying what you quoted, to me, it is the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But you're not satisfied, are you?
I don't know. It just feels too simple, or it feels too. When it's the history of sexuality, if it's really like you could just substitute sexuality as it's the history of sexual orientation. Maybe that is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, well, what is sexuality to you? To me, those are the same thing.
Sexuality is
sexual
I don't
orientation.
Know, like I don't know. I guess I don't know what it means.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, God.
Like sexual orientation is like, are you into people like you? Are you into people who are the opposite of you? Are you into?
I feel like you're making this more complicated than it. Of course, you know what sexuality is.
I'm trying to think of how I would define the term sexuality. I don't know.
I see. Yeah, who you have a sexual orientation for, who you're attracted to.
So I know what like heterosexuality, homosexuality.
Yes. And how's that defined? It's based off of who you're attracted to.
But
your
sexuality without the prefix, I'm struggling with.
Okay.
But okay, all right.
I don't understand your mind sometimes. You don't understand mine, I'm sure. It's just, I don't understand why it's so difficult.
Okay. I don't know, I'm dumb sometimes.
No, you're not. I'm dumb all the time, so.
Yeah, yeah, I'm only dumb sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, no, it's funny because, like,
I take
honestly,
your point. I'll go with what you're saying.
No, you're probably getting at some new. This is where I'm probably being dumber than you, and maybe it actually helps me because it's like I think you're actually overthinking it. That's my point. But maybe you're not. Maybe you are thinking about there's something I'm not
detecting. Get Foucault
detecting.
on the phone.
Yeah,
and let's figure this shit out.
You know, an interesting thing. He didn't want anybody publishing his work posthumously.
Nice. So he's a control freak too.
Yes, of course.
Of course.
I mean, he was the son of a surgeon.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, no.
I'll accept what you're saying. I mean,
okay.
I think that you have read it more in depth.
wouldn't even need to have read it. I mean, I honestly think that's.
You just see the title and you're like,
yes.
Of course.
Well, it's just from reading it. It's obviously what he's talking about.
Okay.
Because he's using it in the modern sense, is my point. Because it didn't exist. That's the point. Yeah. So, of course, it's the modern definition.
Right. So, like, there's no sexual orientations in ancient Greece.
Yes. It was all defined about pleasure.
Right.
But it wasn't like because you had this pleasure, you were this thing,
and
that defines you. And now you're subject to all these other things in society. You have to go and be part of this group.
That's great. So here's where it's, I'm overthinking it because that feels like such a it's not enough payoff. Like he's written hundreds of pages, all these words to say what you just said. Like that was so easy in a sentence and a half. It makes me mad at him.
Well, he had to put evidence for that, That's the point. And that's why I was saying earlier, and what you were saying too, that you believe is like a lot of the benefit to this is he's just bringing up old facts that we've forgotten about.
Right.
Yeah. Who the hell listens to this podcast?
I don't know. I think the last two were better. They were good episodes.
Well, it's funny. The first one that we did better than normal, but the second one
was
worse than normal.
very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe it was because we were in person.
Maybe. Maybe. Yeah. That's neat. So we should always do this in person every week. We should meet in LaGrange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be cool if we could do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's still like an hour and a half drive, right? Something like that. Get a gig in LaGrange every Wednesday.
I mean, that'd like get a residency or something.
Yeah. Go play at the place that they, ZZ
I wonder
Top
if it's like considered ridiculous to play that song there.
Like, get out. They have signs. No LaGrange.
Yeah.
No Stairway and no LaGrange.
Yeah. Well, we have a gig coming up.
Yeah, well, we do.
Yeah. In how many weeks? 2 weeks?
2 weeks. Yeah,
you
I got
excited?
a lot of stuff coming up. Yeah, no, I am. But yeah, I got a lot of other things before then, unfortunately, work-related that, I have to do. But yeah, it'll be fun.
Celis Brewery, May 3rd.
Oh, Celis.
5 p.m. Yep.
I've been telling people Celsius.
Oh. Yeah, they'll go somewhere else. Wait, who have you been telling?
Nobody. I don't know. People on TikTok.
Oh, nice. Are they all coming?
People. Nobody's coming. No, people. Nice. Everybody's coming.
Nice.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. No, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. Celis. Nice. Okay, I got to remember that.
On Metric Boulevard in North Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't want to keep reading this one because it gets too spicy.
It gets very spicy. Because I mean, it talks about like the more specifics of what they were up to.
I see.
The love of boys.
Would you consider yourself a prude?
Me?
Yeah.
No, it's just
me.
Me. I'm just a virtuous being who tries to act with moderation. No, vis-a-vis the Greeks, right? That's what it was. No, it's I don't know. It's just part of it's. I mean, might as well try to finish off the series. But I agree, we're glossing over a lot of stuff.
Because the wisdom of marriage seems like an interesting thing to read about.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd be curious what his perspective on that is.
I mean, I can summarize it if you want.
Sure.
But a lot of it, again, goes to this cost-benefit analysis of and reciprocity. I think the idea is, so if you're going to cheat, there needs to be reciprocity between you and the wife in some way. There needs to be a balance to the relationship in some way. And yeah, it's like if you're going to, I mean, I think that's basically the summary, but there's obviously a lot more details to it.
Cool. I mean, it's not a very long chapter. It looks like it's.
Yeah, I mean, we could do that.
There's a boy's honor. Yes.
I already kind of summarized that too.
Nice.
It's just the idea of, you want to raise the best children, so you have to be very careful with their honor and how you raise them and what you expose them to.
Right.
And because again, like we said, virtue, they looked at it like a muscle. So you have to practice it. And the best time to practice that, in some sense, is when you're young, to develop the habits too.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. And there was this
sounds like a conservative.
Well, he quotes, I mean, Plato's Republic, which was very influential. It was all about how you raise good and make a good society, and to do that, you need to raise people in a certain way.
Right.
And so again, a lot of like, so this was another point that he was making, which was kind of interesting. Although we were about to end, but I mean, this is opening up a lot of other cans of worms.
We should keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing we didn't talk about was this relationship of feminine versus masculine. And it kind of switches a little bit with the Greeks. But so this association with gay people and femininity sort of began in the 19th century, so says Foucault. And it, the idea that you have some men who would put on makeup and dress up and stuff like that, and just do things that were associated with women.
Right.
And then it got associated with also the sexual acts of homosexuality. But that wasn't necessarily the case in Greek culture, as we've said. It's like you didn't have the definition of homosexuality. Instead, what you had was, but you still had people like that. You know what I mean? Like you still had the phenotype of the person who, or the man in this case, who is more feminine. But they didn't look at it I don't think they looked at it from that perspective.
Right.
When they talked about masculine and femininity, though, they did put virtue on the scale. Like basically, they looked at virtue as a thing that men were supposed to hold up, essentially. And that, I guess, they were supposed to set the examples of virtue, essentially, in the society.
Men.
Yes. Yeah. And women were, it's not that they weren't supposed to be virtuous, but they were allowed, I guess, more leniency when it came to virtue. So those are just some points. I don't remember how we got that up. But yeah, anyway.
Well, I thought you were going into the active-passive thing, but...
In what sense? Sorry. Yeah.
Well, because there was a sort of like man-woman binary there, but then it also left space for men to take on a passive role.
Well, yes. So, it was the idea that the men are supposed to be actively maintaining virtue, I guess.
Right.
Maybe is the idea.
But then they're also the ones who are the doers in terms of sex.
Yes.
And then women are passive, i.e. receivers.
Well, yeah, I don't. Yeah,
that's what it says.
Yeah, I think you're right. I forgot about that, though.
Why? I'm not just inventing this.
These are all Antushka's ideas, by the way.
What, is this too dirty for you?
No,
you chose the book. You've never heard anything like this.
No. My sensitive ears. Yeah. Were you going to read something? Sorry, it looks like you were.
No. I'm looking for it, but I don't have it. I was trying to find it. That's where I thought you were going, because there is a male-female binary brought up there, and then the ways that I think he specifically talks about men sort of traversing both sides of that binary. He doesn't really talk about the option of women to be givers.
Yeah. On the other hand, a man who was not sufficiently... Okay, so here we go. So here's 85, page 85. So I think this is probably a good thing to read. And this is going off of the whole moderation stuff. So in this sense, the man of pleasure and desire, the man of non-mastery, enkrateia, or self-indulgence, achalasia, was a man who could be called feminine, but more essentially with respect to himself than with respect to others. In the experience of sexuality such as ours, where a basic scansion maintains an opposition between masculine and feminine, the femininity of men is perceived in the actual or virtual transgression of his sexual role. No one be tempted to label as effeminate a man whose love for women leads to immoderation on his part. That is, short of doing a whole job of decipherment that would uncover the, quote, latent homosexuality, end quote, that secretly inhabits his unstable and promiscuous relation to them. In contrast, for the Greeks, it was the opposition between activity and passivity that was essential, pervading the domain of sexual behaviors and that of moral attitudes as well. Thus, it was not hard to see how a man might prefer males without anyone even suspecting him of effeminacy, provided he was active in the sexual relation and active in the moral mastering of himself. On the other hand, a man who was not sufficiently in control of his pleasures whatever his choice of object, was regarded as feminine. So the dividing line between a virile man and an effeminate man did not coincide with our opposition between hetero and homosexuality. That was what I was saying earlier.
Right.
Nor was it confined to the opposition between active and passive homosexuality. It marked the difference in people's attitudes towards the pleasure and the traditional signs of effeminacy. Idleness, indolence, refusal to engage in the somewhat rough activities of sports, a fondness for perfumes and adornments, softness, were not necessarily associated with the individual who in the 19th century would be called a, quote, invert, but with the one who yielded to the pleasures that enticed him. He was under the power of his own appetites and those of others.
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah, that's basically
sense.
what I was saying.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting and provocative, obviously. I think.
Well, so the what I was talking about is kind of related to that. It's interesting that he talks about the active and he mentions the active and passive binary in there.
Exactly.
So in that passage that you just read, is he talking about Greek conception of sexuality? So the Greek conception of sexuality,
yes,
says that the feminine form of sexuality is the giving in to desire, and the masculine form of sexuality is the mastery of desire.
Yes,
basically,
exactly.
Yeah,
which it was making me think about the whole Bible, Adam and Eve, like Eve eating the apple kind of thing, honestly.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. That's an interesting point. I didn't make that connection, but that's a very good connection. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a much more interesting point than what I found. But what I was talking about, I did find it, is it's doubtless correct to say that there is no noun in the Greek vocabulary that would consolidate into a common notion whatever might be specific to male sexuality and female sexuality. But it should be remarked that in the practice of sexual pleasures, two roles and two poles can be clearly distinguished. That's interesting that he's saying that there are two roles sexually, and that's not a narrative.
Right. And this is my point. It's like, I feel like, and this is what I was asking, and maybe impolitely, how well you understand Judith Butler, but it's like...
She's way more...
Okay. You're positive she doesn't have any kind of basis, is all I was asking.
I mean, I'm not positive she doesn't have any kind of basis. Yeah. I'm saying that she said literally, like reading it, that the penis is a social construction, and we have no way of knowing whether or not a penis is a real thing.
Okay. All right, sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
No, that's fine. Yeah. I don't know. No, I don't know for a fact that she has no basis.
Okay.
I know for a fact that she says that sex and gender are cultural narratives that we perform.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so two roles can be distinguished in the reproductive function. These consisted of two positional values, that of the subject and that of the object. And then he goes on to talk about how men occupy the subject role and women occupy the object role, although men can also occupy the object role, presumably with other men.
Right.
Or boys can also he says that too.
I know.
But he doesn't say women can take on the subject role, which is interesting.
Well, in Greek society.
Right. Yes.
Or ancient Greek society, to be specific.
Right.
Yeah. I could make a very, very bad joke right now, but I didn't.
A bad joke?
Yeah.
Well, because then he relates it to the Hippocratic Oath. That was interesting, too. I have that highlighted. So at the end of this little bit where he's talking about active and passive and object and subject.
Oh, he talks, yes. Yeah.
Because he says the
doctors should not have sexual relations with their patients.
Right. Do not make their patients into objects.
Yes.
Whether a woman, a free man, or a slave.
Mm-hmm.
I like that last little bit because it makes it seem like somebody asked a question. They're like, you say we shouldn't have sex with patients. What if it's a woman?
God.
Not them either.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, no, I mean, he's got a lot of, and he brings up Hippocrates again in the dietitian part.
But, okay.
Or dietetics. Yeah. Wow. I thought we were ending. No, this is good though.
No, it's good because we needed to get a little bit more out of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is I guess would be the reason to continue on this is that there is a lot left to be said, but I still do kind of think that we should try to just read some of the third volume.
Yeah, that's
next
fine.
Week. Just because I think we hit most of the main points, and I think there's going to be just some, he's talking about, I think he goes into more details in the Romans sort of stuff, and that fills in the gap of how we got to today, too, which is part of what I want to look at. And he talks about it a little bit in the first volume, how the confessional kind of led to the discursive revolution. But
it's always a fun word. I like when people use that word.
What?
Discursive.
Yeah.
It's so, like, flowery.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't hear it too much. I don't.
Except in postmodernism.
Yeah. Really?
It's all over the place, yeah.
Okay. Probably because of him.
Probably.
I mean, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about discourse. Maybe not because of him. Who knows? I put too much emphasis on Foucault, I realize.
I don't think you do. I think Foucault is a hugely important thing.
Whatever, man.
What? Fuck you. I put too much emphasis on.
Yeah. No, I've been listening to a lot more of, well, dare I say?
I don't know. Wait, well, who?
Tim Dillon.
Okay. Why would that be a problem? Somehow Tim Dillon is like, he skates by, he's fine. Nobody dislikes Tim Dillon.
It's because I don't know. Yeah, anyway. But yeah, no, I was listening to his old episodes with Ray Kump.
Right.
And I mean, I think part of what makes their dynamic so entertaining is they're always attacking each other. So I think we should attack each other a little bit more.
Right. Well, we need to disagree more.
It's true. You idiot.
That's fine. I mean, I'm an idiot. I don't get the sexuality thing.
Yeah, they're always calling each other fat animals. We really got to up it.
Yeah.
Call me a fat animal right now, please.
Yeah. You're not very fat, though.
But I am an animal.
Right, yeah. It's true.
Slovenly. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. All right, we did it. We'll be back next week.
We
folks,
will be
with
back.
More Foucault,
this
just
for
good. You.
We had to do a long one. I mean, you've been gone for 2 weeks.
Right.
We've been
this wasn't even a long one.
This was a long one. Yeah, this was like an hour 15.
We're at an hour 9.
Oh, right. Oh. Well,
yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. We got to pick.
Yeah.
I feel like the problem is that Foucault is spicy in that the ideas are spicy, but it's not spicy in that we're gonna beat each other's throats about it.
No. Yeah, no. It's more the ideas. You just gotta be very careful. Gotta be very careful.
That's not fun.
Yeah, I know. But
yeah.
All
right. Well, we'll be back next week with more Foucault.
Okay.
See you, folks.
See you.